Katie Fortney, University of Delaware students and faculty and friends and staff and guests, welcome to the University of Delaware and the Morris Library, the main library at the University of Delaware. I express appreciation to our guest, Katie Fortney, for her willingness to come to us from California, arriving by plane yesterday, to speak to us today. I also would like to thank Dr. Ann Artis and the Perspectives on Digital Humanities series for support for today's event. Ann Artis, are you here? I was going to ask that you rise and be recognized. Is she? Okay, there she is. You always enter to applause, Ann. That's not Copyright Risk Assessment for Digital Humanities, Archiving the Grateful Dead Online, is part of the Perspectives in Digital Humanities series, which is co-sponsored by the Interdisciplinary Humanities Research Center, the College of Arts and Sciences, and the University of Delaware Library. The digital humanities are important to the University of Delaware and to the University of Delaware Library, which has been involved with the creation or collaboration with them for many years. The library has digitized a number of primary source materials located in special collections that will provide the basis for a number of digital humanities projects. Materials include, for example, Civil War letters and diaries, historic maps of Delaware and the Mid-Atlantic region, the papers of the great American photographer, Gertrude Casimir, the Iron Hill Museum Oral History Collection, some papers from the Chrysler Corporation, formerly of Newark, Delaware, and the papers of the great mid-20th century diplomat, George Messersmith. George Messersmith's story is really quite interesting, the fact that the library has digitized it, and so I'm going to just elaborate a little bit on it. He was known, his nickname was the Diplomat of Democracy, and he served as a diplomat for the United States during the 1930s in Hitler's Germany. He wrote long, single-spaced, typewritten and narrative, cursive writing, letters on onion skin paper back to FDR, in which he gave eyewitness accounts of Nazi Germany, including having dinner with Hitler. There was an enormous demand, has been enormous demand for use of George Messersmith's papers, and they're one of the library's most heavily used archival collections. The papers have supported numerous articles and books and have served as a primary source for many theses and dissertations. The University of Delaware Library then received a grant from the NHPRC, the National Historical Publications and Records Commission, to digitize the George Messersmith papers. And so they now have worldwide electronic access. There is an interesting footnote in his new book, relatively new book, by Erik Larson, In the Garden of Beasts, that perhaps you have read. And notice, if you read, it's in the bibliography, it's not in the footnotes, on page 372, Erik Larson states, "At the University of Delaware in Newark, I examined the papers of George Messersmith, one of the most beautifully archived collections I have ever come across, and had the pleasure while there," and then he goes on of who we met, etc. But it was a real tribute to special collection staff and the digitizing now of the George Messersmith papers. Okay, there we are. Okay. I have a couple of housekeeping activities which I would now like to do. For those persons who paid in a pay-for-parking lot, any campus pay-to-park lot, or library staff will give you a name tag to provide you with parking validation after the reception. Also, as a courtesy, would you please turn off anything that has an off and on switch? Turn it off. I also share with you that the program will be taped today by Information Technologies and eventually made available online on the webpage of the Perspectives on Digital Humanities. It is also deliberately done, and at the request of Katie Fortney, the question and answer period will not be recorded. So it means that candid questions can be asked in all ways. Yeah. Kathy Wojciechowski, was in charge of this program, and I thank her now for her leadership and in all the arrangements that she made with Katie Fortney's visit. She is the Scholarly Communication Officer and Librarian in the Reference and Instructional Services Department at the University of Delaware Library. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Kathy. She received a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Delaware in Biological Sciences, a graduate library degree then from Rutgers University, and a Master of Public Administration from the University of Delaware. So Kathy, over to you, and thank you.
As a scholarly communication officer, my task is to promote discussion on campus of copyright, open access, digital rights management, and authors' licensing options. I hope today's presentation and discussion will be an interesting and enlightening way to consider the variety of these issues. That didn't sound right. A variety of these issues. The Copyright Management Officer at the University of California Digital Library, Katie Fortney, provides the University of California campuses with educational resources and policy guidance on copyright and rights management issues related to scholarly research and University of California publishing services, special collections access platforms, and data management tools. She keeps an eye on the UC faculty open access policy effort and national and international copyright policy initiatives. Katie holds a graduate master's degree in library science from San Jose State University, a JD from New York University, and a BS in English Literature from Iowa State University. She was hired as an instruction librarian at UC Santa Cruz and very quickly moved on to a position as collection development librarian for a variety of science areas and scholarly communications officer. She worked with faculty, students, and staff on authors' rights, open access, publishing, and copyright issues. She also consulted with the Grateful Dead Archive, special collections, and digital initiatives on intellectual property. Hence, her experience upon which her talk is based today. I heard Katie give a very brief introduction to this talk in Indianapolis, and I hope you all enjoyed today's talk as much as I enjoyed that one.
Thank you. Let me get settled up here. Got my water. All right. Thanks. So thank you for that very warm welcome. I'm Katie. Hello. And thank you so much for having me here. I'm having a great time in Delaware. I'm very excited to see such a full crowd here, excited to talk with us about copyright, because that's my favorite thing to talk about. If you're here because you're excited to talk about the Grateful Dead, don't ask me any hard questions. If anybody looks really excited about the Grateful Dead, whoever has the microphones, don't go to them when we get to the Q&A. Where's my remote? There we go. This is the site I'm here to talk about today. This is the Grateful Dead Archive Online, built, maintained, lovingly hosted at UC Santa Cruz Library. It's got about 37,000 items indexed in this site. The URL is right there. If those of you with tiny computers go take a peek at it while I'm talking, I promise not to be offended. It's a fun time. It was launched in June of 2012. So to start out today, I'll tell you a little bit more about that site, what's in it, how it got there, how the site works. Move on to talk about what our copyright challenges were with that site and how we dealt with those. Now that the site's been up for 1.5 years, I can tell you what the reaction has been from the fans and the users, the people whose intellectual property is up in the site. And then we can talk a little bit about broader implications of our experience with it. So the band got the archive, or the library got the archive from the band in 2008. We made the news. So Not every library works with a rock band, so that was kind of weird. Not every band has an archive to give. That's a little bit weird. The Grateful Dead had Eileen Law, who was hired in the 70s to take care of the fans and the office, and she saved things. I think she saved everything. She had a closet, and then a room, and eventually a warehouse. And as the surviving members of the band were getting older, and they have this warehouse full of stuff, they just wanted to know that that was someplace where it was going to be taken care of and stewarded, and they didn't have to worry about it anymore. So they looked at a couple of libraries, a couple of universities around the Bay Area, and settled on UC Santa Cruz. And this was the great press we got on the front page of the Chronicle when that happened. I say we, I wasn't there yet. But we also have been on the cover of College and Research Libraries News and various other news outlets. We made it to Senator Tom Coburn's Waste Book 2010, number 4 on the list of top 10 most wasteful government expenditures in 2010 for the federal grant we received to build this website. So not all the press has been good, but it's kind of a big deal. So this is a summary of what was in that. For you folks who deal in special collections, it was over 600 linear feet. This is a picture I took in special collections standing up. This whole one side of one shelf is all stuff from that accession. And there is, of course, more. This is only the stuff that fits in these fun little archival boxes. The posters are somewhere else. There is a giant stage backdrop. There are the skeleton puppets from the Touch of Grey video. There is a VW bus. So not everything in the collection made it to the website. This is the summary of the stuff that went to the website. About 27,000 things were digitized to go up on the site. Many types of things. So the library got the archive in 2008. They got the grant to make this website in 2009, in keeping with their agreement with the band. So a lot of times, a new collection that you get in a special collections at a library, depending on the library's backlog and their priorities, that might take years to get processed before it sees the light of day. And even then, people have to come into the library, into special collections to see it. It was important to the band that some of this stuff could be accessed by fans all over the world who might not make it to Santa Cruz, who might not be comfortable coming into special collections in the first place. So the website, good way to do that. Let's see, where are we? And we built it on Omeka. We didn't start from scratch. This is, Omeka is an open source project out of the Center for History and New Media at George Mason University. A lot of museums and libraries work with it because it's good at doing online exhibits. We're a pretty large site for an Omeka site, and it didn't do everything we wanted out of the box. So one of the things the grant paid for was a programmer to do a lot of customization, build some new tools that are then open source and go back into the Omeka community. One of the main ways to browse the site, because it is a Grateful Dead site, they are a concert-based band, is by show. So I don't know if you can see from where you sit, but every little red blob on that map, this is the venue map built on Google Maps, is our little rose icon from our logo there, and every one of those is a venue. So you can zoom in and pick your venue. I tried to find one in Delaware, but apparently the Dead never played Delaware. So for my example, I went back to California because they played a lot of shows in the Bay Area. And you can see here I've clicked on Shoreline Amphitheater where they played a bunch. You can pull up all the items related to that venue. If it's a place like Shoreline where they played multiple times, you can then narrow it down by show. And what that does, it creates for you a little mini exhibit on the fly of things associated with that show. So you can look at pictures taken at that concert, you can see tickets from that concert, posters promoting it, t-shirts sold there, and listen to the music, but the library doesn't have the music. What the band gave the library was everything else, which is fine. We didn't care about the music. We wanted the weird little stuff because special collections. But for a site like this, it was kind of weird not to have the music. So if anybody was listening to numbers I was spouting earlier, the difference between the 27,000 things that we digitized and the 37,000 things in the site are these music files. The Internet Archive is just over the mountains from us, and they've been building up a collection of fan tapes uploaded to their site for years No reason for us to try to duplicate that. We talk to them, we embed a player that streams from their site, and then people can listen to this show from 1987 while they look at pictures of it and all this other fun stuff. Of course, this site was built in a library, so everything is tagged with rich metadata. You can do advanced searches. You can pull up every picture taken of Phil Lesh by Herb Green in the archive, and then narrow that by year. So there's many ways to get to the content. So where do I come in? I'm not the programmer, I'm not the project manager or the archivist. I'm the copyright ninja, which I never got them to put on any official paperwork. They wrote down intellectual property advisor. But they brought me on. I came on in 2010 as an instruction librarian who happened to have a law degree. And they'd been scanning stuff, and they have this grant that says they're going to make this website, and people start to kind of look around. How are we going to do this without getting sued? Oh, we have a new lawyer in the building. So the project manager walks into my office, loops me in, because nobody else wants to read things like this. Normal people do not walk around saying things like, original works of authorship fixed in a tangible medium of expression, which I say all the time. And so do lots of my friends. We're great fun at parties. So I was not their lawyer. I do not give legal advice. Nothing I say to you today should be construed as legal advice. But it's handy to have a lawyer in the building when you work on a project like this, so that when you do go talk to, say, campus council, they are happier to see you, because you're not going to take as much of their time. You've got pretty refined and ready to go things for them to approve. And they needed a lot of that because almost everything in this collection is protected by copyright. If you're dealing with a project where everything you're worried about is published in English before 1923, then you don't need me. Our oldest stuff is from the 60s, all the way up to practically yesterday. Hardly any of it is in the public domain. And copyright law says that for stuff that is protected by copyright, there's this list of things that are the exclusive right of the copyright holder, and you are supposed to get their permission before copying it. Reproduction, public performance, public display, distribution, things that we wanted to do. Fortunately, copyright law has several safety valves built in, exceptions to these exclusive rights. Some of them are narrowly tailored, like the classroom use exception. You can show a movie to a whole class, and even if that class is 200 people, that doesn't violate the public performance right. Some of them are much broader, like my personal favorite exception, fair use. Section 107 of the copyright law says that if something's a fair use, that's not an infringement. And to figure out if something is fair use, you look at the 4 factors in the statute, which I've paraphrased here. Number 1, the purpose of your use, so it weighs against you if you're making money, weighs in your favor if you're one of the uses listed in the statute. Comment and criticism, research and scholarship, education, these are good things. Number 2, the nature of the work being copied. Is it more factual or more creative, published or unpublished? The amount of the work being used. Are you using the whole thing? That'll weigh against you. The less you use, the more likely to be fair use. And number 4, the effect of your use on reasonable markets the copyright holder might want to exploit. That is a lot of stuff. And that's part of the reason that fair use gets a bad name, because it sounds complicated, and I grant you that if I stood up here and talked at you for an hour, you still wouldn't feel confident going out and doing it yourself. But it's not brain surgery. You know, if we had a couple of hours where we broke down in small groups and talked through important cases and some key examples, we could all get pretty good at it. And as a country, we've been doing fair use for 150 years. So there are plenty of things over here that we all agree are fair use. Individuals do them every day without thinking about it. Large corporations rely on them. And then we have things over here that we all agree are not fair use. You can't just go and scan something and make 1 billion copies of it because you'd rather not buy more if it's readily available on the market. It's these things in the middle where it's tricky because it was built to be flexible. We don't want to have to wait for Congress to write more law every time somebody invents something like a VCR. That would be crazy. So we rely on fair use, and our project relied on fair use a lot, which made a lot of people in the building a little uncomfortable at the beginning of the project. A lot of us who work in libraries like clear rules. I think that's how we end up in libraries. We like explicit permission, and we knew from the get-go with this project that just wasn't feasible. Add to that the fact that there's a lot of rock posters in this collection, not just Grateful Dead posters, but other bands that they collected from the same era. Some of those posters, a variety of them, have been involved in at least 3 different lawsuits. copyright lawsuits, one of which went all the way to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals about this book here. We have photographs. Photographers are kind of notoriously interested in tightly controlling their copyrights. We have unpublished works. It used to be the case that it was very hard to get a finding of fair use for something that was unpublished. And then we're just doing it a lot. 23,000 items ended up in the site on the basis of fair use. This was not how we presented it to Campus Council, like pulling out the scariest things. This is how we presented it. We walked through these factors. So we'll talk about the fan envelopes. That's a huge bulk of the number of items in the site. So for those of you who know about as much about the Grateful Dead as I did when I joined the project, I will explain where these comes from. So starting in the 80s, if you wanted concert tickets, you would send a money order self-addressed stamped envelope to a P.O. box and hope for the best. There were often more people wanting tickets than there were tickets available. So to try to increase your chances, you would see if you could catch somebody's eye in the office by having a really cool envelope. Also, it was just fun, way to send your love to the band. And we've got thousands of these things. We don't have all of them. Some of them have wandered off over the years, but we've got a ton. These are 6 examples I pulled out that caught my eye as I was browsing. You can look at more if you want to go to the site. So we've got these things. They're interesting. We want to put them up. So we look at our 4 factors from a couple slides ago. First factor, we're not making any money here. We're a research and scholarship site. We're educational, so we win the first factor. Factor number 2, well, these works are creative and they're unpublished, so we lose that one. Number 3, entire work. How much? All of it, front and back, whole thing. So you could say we lose that one. There's also case law that says if you're just using what you need to accomplish your good purpose, then that shouldn't count against you. So maybe that's neutral. Fourth and finally, there's no market in these things. Nobody is making money off of pictures of envelopes like this. The people who created them never intended on making any money. They wanted tickets, and the creation of these envelopes was just incidental to that. For all they knew, these were going to end up in the trash. So we feel pretty confident about 1 and 4, and that leaves us with 2 and 2, or 2 and 1 and neutral. And that's where if you know a little bit about fair use, but not a ton, you are frustrated or confused. But I'm going to tell you a secret. It's not a well-kept secret because it's from a published law review article, but nobody reads those things except copyright nerds. 2008, Barton Beebe article, he did an empirical analysis of every single fair use opinion from a US court from 1978 to 2005. 1978 because that's when we got the new fair use statute. And he found that these 2 factors that we won on, the first and the fourth, are pretty important. How important? Well, they don't always agree, but when they do, that is how your case tends to come out. So if you win the first and the fourth, you win your case. If you lose on the first and the fourth, you lose your case 213 out of 214 times. So we read that and we felt a little better. And intuitively, that felt right. So we said, okay, that's great. We think we're on solid ground here. And we put them up. Thousands of them without looking for anybody, without asking anybody. And nobody died. The tickets, the next biggest, bulkiest chunk of the website, we also didn't ask anybody, very similar analysis. There's no market out there for access to looking at pictures of tickets. Who would do that? The ticket is worth getting you into the concert, and then maybe it's your souvenir. These are fun to think about because there's a question with a lot of them as whether you even have to reach a fair use analysis, because you can't copyright facts, and these are required facts, a lot of them presented in a very utilitarian, basic way. So to the extent that there's copyrightability at all here, it's in maybe the artwork. We put fair use on the whole series. We just said, because you can do a batch thing in Content DM for thousands of things that says, we're doing this as fair use. And that's easy. But if we wanted to go through one at a time and said, this orange one, we're just going to say no known copyright restrictions. This is basically in the public domain in the United States. So the bulk of the stuff on the site, we're very confident in our fair use. Those aren't the only items on the site. There's a lot of other things going on. So we've got those 2 over here that we're very confident about, clearly fair use. We've got other things that we're very not comfortable with. We've got periodicals that started out as, say, Grateful Dead fan newsletters, eventually became commercially successful magazines. Magazines selling access to their back archives is a very traditional and reasonable market. So we weren't going to put those up unless we got permission from those guys. But most of the stuff was more over here. Usually, we're not impacting anybody's market. Usually, there is no market in the thing, or for things like posters, where people are selling these, they're selling big prints, right? Nobody's paying to look at a tiny picture of a poster. And we are not providing high-resolution downloads so somebody can go print their own poster. We're providing viewing-friendly images, and maybe you can zoom in on parts of them. So maybe for 98% of the site, we could have just put it up without asking anybody. But we're dealing with a community that's still very active. And we don't want to make the wrong people mad. We don't want them to publicly come out against our project and sour things with the fans. Really, we want them to like us because we want the stuff in their attics. So we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but then you have to balance that around, how much can you tap dance around somebody's feelings without sacrificing your objectives to complete this cool project. So this is what we did for the photographers and the poster artists. So photographers just generally tend to really want to control their copyrights, very sensitive. Poster artists here are very sensitive for a pretty good reason. So back in the 60s and early 70s, copyright law said, if you commission a poster and somebody pays you, you're done, they own the copyright now. And so a lot of folks who didn't know they needed to have very explicit legal agreements changing that default under the law, made works that became very iconic, made a lot of money for someone else, and they had no say in how it was going to be used. So we can understand why they're a little sensitive. The default has changed since 1978. Now things tend to be in favor of the artist. But we wanted to build some bridges with these folks, build some goodwill. So for 300 photographers and 150 poster artists, our project tried to find and ask for permission from every single one of them. We did that a couple of ways. One, we have the Grateful Dead archivist who's been active in this community for ages, knows who the big players are, was already talking to them for other reasons, and he reached out to them. Very reasonable. Second, we had our rights management coordinator, whose name is Sarah, try to find everybody else in directories of photographers, on Google, just wherever. That was less successful. And finally, once the site went live, we did make our email address easy to find. It's all over the site. It's in the copyright information field for every single item. If you have more information about this, please contact us. So how successful? Really? Really not good. So the vast majority of people that Sarah tried to find just were not findable. Not everybody's active on the internet. Some people have very common names. Some people were using a name like Captain Colors with a Z. And that's not easy to track down 20 or 30 years later. So the vast majority of people, or the majority of people, couldn't find. And then when she did find an address that seemed reliable, she'd send out the letter or the email and never hear back. Folks she did hear back from were generally positive. There were a very few no's, I would say less than 10. But even this tiny green pie wedge that you see here is artificially inflated if you're thinking about Sarah's work, because the bulk of that is from our archivist and people he already knew. So is that just a fact of the flaky Grateful Dead community, that they're hard to find? No, that's common all over. This is, and it gets worse the older your collection is. So this is from a paper that came out in 2010. It's a collection at UNC Chapel Hill, the Thomas E. Watson papers. And they had a correspondence collection. They spent 800 hours trying to track down rights holders, and they got permission from two, who were basically famous people that they would have been able to find, in under 1 hour. So both of these charts would have looked really similar without the hundreds of hours of staff time spent trying to track people down, and you just look and say, well, who do we already know? Who's famous? And famous is relative. Your subject expert will have a different idea of famous and how to find those people. Who do we know who likes to sue people? And then you could be done. But we did it because it was a fun outreach exercise for us. It did build some goodwill. It did build some early buzz about the site. And we did get some more stuff to add to the collection through that project. So we did that. The site went live, and we started getting email. So I looked at all the email coming to the general project email address, grateful@UCSC, after about 7 months when things had really started to trickle off, and coincidentally I had a conference proceeding due. And there were a little over 200 of them. Most of them had nothing to do with creators or rights holders. There were reference questions about the collection. There were comments like, this photo, you've got this labeled as so-and-so and his daughter, that's actually his girlfriend. So you fix that. 37 emails were from creators of the items, and last I knew, 15 items in the collection had been taken down. So we put up 23,000 things without permission. So that's the envelopes, the tickets, the T-shirts, the posters and the photographs, all those ones where we couldn't find anybody or we never heard back, we went ahead and put those up. If people said no, we left those restricted to campus for the time being. We'll evaluate later if we want to open those up. And there we are. And of the people who wanted their stuff taken down, all of them were envelope artists. So the cool thing about the envelopes that people love is that you can go in and search by your name and find your old envelope. But what not everybody loves is that their coworkers or their potential employers searches for their name in Google, and we're a big site, so we come up in the first page of results. And suddenly the person you're applying for a job with knows that you wanted to go to a Grateful Dead concert 20 years ago. And maybe that person is in a different place in their life right now, and they don't want that information associated with them. Other people didn't like that the home addresses were visible, and so anybody who had a concern, we just take it down. 15 out of 23,000, which is less than 1%. It's a very tiny number. And nobody mentioned copyright. One person mentioned copyright to say, this is not about copyright. We also got a lot of very positive comments from artists and photographers. We heard from a photographer who sent us an article where she was being profiled. And this was one of the photographers that we had tried to contact, and we just never heard anything back. So she sends us this email and says, look where I'm profiled, this article about me in my local paper, this magazine. And in it, she's bragging about how her pictures are in the Grateful Dead archive, and she has them linked back to our site. She's thrilled. We heard from artists all the way in Japan, graphic artists who were just delighted to find that their stuff was still around, had been kept, was part of this larger thing. The line that sticks with me is, "It is happy for its artwork to be filed." It's like a little poem. All these quotes here are from envelope artists. The sweet Jesus lady at the bottom is my favorite. That whole email is full of all caps, and she's just thrilled. That just says, "Sweet Jesus, you made our day," because I didn't know where else to crop it. But by and large, the reaction was really positive. So, been up for a year and a half. Nobody's been sued. No cease and desist letters. A couple of polite, friendly emails. Love the site. Great to see my envelope again. Please take it down now. And we're good. So our project, revolutionary, groundbreaking on the copyright front, right? Not exactly. So this is a statement from the Prosperity and Thrift Project at the Library of Congress, and they put this up in 1999. They relied a lot on fair use. They also have not been sued. There's a number of libraries here and there relying on fair use to do digitization, put things online, particularly from special collections. But you can't always find them, and nobody thinks to search for them because they often think that nobody can do this is off the table, because they've had good advice telling them that. So there's a CLIR, Clear Council of Library Information Resources report from 1998 on selection for digitization. And in a section called Copyright, the place to begin, it says basically, if it's not in the public domain and you don't have permission, forget about it, go digitize something else. And other guidelines from around the same time are similar. And 1998 isn't that long ago, especially in libraries where a lot of us are wearing a lot of different hats and can't keep up on every little subject. So it's not that surprising to find that 12 years later, this ARL survey with confidential interviews, 60 different libraries, finds that by and large, people are digitizing public domain materials regardless of scholarly needs, even if they've got much cooler stuff. not because they've decided the copyright is restrictive for that collection, but just because they don't want to think about it. This drives me crazy. So I work in libraries. I love libraries. Libraries have all this neat stuff in special collections that could be used for very cool projects. So as one example, the University of Iowa has digitized their Civil War diaries and opened that up for crowdsourced transcription, which is neat. Civil War is interesting, but that's a long time ago. And it makes me wonder what we could be learning about the Vietnam War or the Civil Rights Movement or 20th century literature if we didn't think those things were automatically off the table because of copyright. So we need to switch from copyright, the place to begin. Copyright shouldn't come first. The importance and interestingness of the project should come first. Copyright and other legal risks have to be looked at. You would be crazy not to. But they need to be examined from a place of knowledge, and you have to look at the project first so that you can balance what might be a small or medium risk, a real risk, but not a huge one, against the risk to your mission of not doing that really important project. So libraries have come a long way since 1998. Just in the past year or two, these two publications have come out. Both of these would have been invaluable to me in 2010, trying to convince people on my campus that what we were doing was really okay. The one on the left is Code of Best Practices for Fair Use in Academic Research Libraries. There's about a dozen of these codes for poetry, media literacy education, documentary filmmaking. And I love these codes because they're a series of situations where people in a field have gotten together and we said that we think these things, done right, are fair use. And it's not in a vacuum. A team of independent lawyers looks at it and vets it and says it's reasonable. And there's explanations. So it's not just this thing, but it's the fair use analysis and the particular conditions so that somebody who's not a librarian or a poet could find that analysis and maybe apply it to their situation. So principle 4 in here is about digitizing special collections, but the analysis is just as good even if it wasn't a library collection. On the right, we have RLI 279, which is a catchy title. Copyright risk management, principles and strategies for large-scale digitization projects. And we can pretend the title ends there, because it says in special collection, but again, a lot of the analysis, the logic, the legal stuff is applicable elsewhere, and it's especially applicable in libraries. And he talks about things like triaging your collection for who would really bother to sue you, and then moving from there. So that is my site. That is how we benefited from fair use. And nobody got sued. Everything is fine. And then some resources if you want to do some further reading. The ARL site in particular has all kinds of great articles to catch people up on fair use in the last 10 years. So that's all I got.